Recently, Jay Metcalf from the Better Sax YouTube channel put up a poll asking everyone how they mic their saxophone. And I'm sorry to say, 71% of you are doing it wrong. So let's fix that. It's a common misconception that all the sound of the saxophone comes from the bell. After all, it's the giant hole at the end of the instrument, but it's actually quite a lot more complicated than that. You see, the sax has got holes all the way down the instrument called tone holes, and unless we're playing a low B flat, some of these are always open. And the sound actually comes out of all of these holes, so by the time it's got down to the bell, pretty much all the sound's already gone. Don't believe me? Check this out. I've stuffed the bell full of socks, t-shirts and all that sort of thing, and unless most of my fingers are pressed down, the tone doesn't really change very much. So if we point the mic directly into the bell, we're missing out on all the sound coming out of the tone holes. And if I'm playing a screaming solo on the palm keys, the microphone's barely going to pick up anything. You see, microphones are designed to only pick up sound from certain directions, called a polar pattern. And most microphones have what's called a cardioid polar pattern, which just means they pick up sound from in front of them, and they reject sound coming from behind and from the sides. So if that microphone's pointing directly into the bell, well, all the tone holes are to the side, so the microphone just can't hear them. So to get a pretty natural sounding combination of the sounds from the tone holes and also the bell sounds, we actually want to position the microphone so it's pointing about halfway between the keys and the bell. That way, most of the tone holes are directly in front of the microphone, and the ones that aren't, along with the bell sounds, aren't so far off to the sides that the microphone can't hear them. Pretty much everything is inside that polar pattern. Now, if you do have a super fancy microphone that's got multiple different polar patterns, it might be tempting to use something like an omnidirectional one that picks up sound all around. That way, it's going to be easier to get sound from all of the tone holes, right? Well, in my experience, that ends up never quite working as well as it does in my head. Normally you get way too much sound that's just not you playing, whether that's room reverb, other musicians playing, or trains going past. So even if you do have multiple options, you want to make sure you're still sticking with a cardioid polar pattern. When we're hearing a saxophone live, the sound that comes from the tone holes and also the sound that comes from the bell kind of mix together in the air to create the sound that we hear. And this needs a little bit of space to happen. So if you're in a home recording or a studio situation, make sure there's a little bit of a gap between you and the microphone to give that space for the sound to mix together. If you're too close to the microphone, you're going to end up with a nasal sound. And if we're too far away from the microphone, we're going to end up getting a sound that's really echoey and reverby. We're not going to get a clean saxophone sound, which means it's going to be really hard work to make that recording even slightly usable. And this is especially true if, like me, you're not in a fully acoustically treated space. And there's another train. A good rule of thumb to get this position correct is for the mouthpiece, the bell of the instrument, and the microphone to create like an equilateral triangle. That way you're getting a nice happy medium, enough space for the sounds to mix together into a natural sort of sound without adding in loads and loads of unwanted reverb or echo. Now, if we're in a live situation, being so far away from the mic... Now, if we're in a live situation, being so far away from the microphone isn't really an option. You might have a whole band crammed onto a tiny stage, so there's simply not the space, but even if it was possible, being that far away would definitely cause the microphone to pick up other instruments, whether that's other horns, guitars, whatever. And that is no way to make a sound engineer like you. And they are the most important person when it comes to making you and your band sound good. Treat them well, make them like you, you're gonna have a great time. But anyway, you're gonna have to get closer to the microphone when you're playing live, but you're still gonna want it pointing about halfway between the bell and the keys. So although your sound doesn't have as much room to breathe before it gets to the microphone, you're still getting a pretty good mix of the tone holes and the bell sounds, giving you a pretty natural tone. And if you're using a clip-on microphone rather than a microphone on a stand, well, it's the same vibe. Some clip-ons are in like a set position, so there's not much you can do, but most of them are on a sort of gooseneck so you can adjust it. In which case, get that microphone as far away from the instrument as you can so your sound has as much space as possible to breathe. I mean, it won't be a huge amount, but every little helps. And still make sure the microphone is pointing between the bell and the keys. Have I said that enough yet? Between the bell and the keys. Now all of this is going to set you up for a great sound, whether that's live or in recordings. And of course, there's room for experimentation. Different microphone positions are going to give you a slightly different sound, as we've heard, right? So you might have a personal preference depending on your own individual saxophone tone. But use this as a starting point. Don't just point the microphone into the bell without thinking.